All right, Pouring Nation, today I'm going to give you all my tips and tricks to use this to make beautiful acrylic pours like this. So my first blow dryer tips and tricks when doing an acrylic pour is make sure you have room around your pour that you're okay getting dirty. I use this bin that I have made for myself, but I have some area on this 10 by 20 to actually blow and splatter paint. You got to realize you're using a high-powered blow dryer on very liquid paint. It is going to spray and splatter, as is evident here in my pouring container. So definitely have room around you. I've even hit the wall back here, which is 2 or 3 feet away, and my custom-made light diffusers, I have hit those doing a pour right here where this bin is. So definitely have room to do your pour. So the next step is to get the right paint consistency. Too thick and the paint won't move like you want it, which I'm going to show an example with these paints here. Too thin and it will just go everywhere and just make a big mess. So we want to get the right paint consistency. Now if you've seen my video about consistency, I will link it below and show it up top. But essentially we want a thin consistency, but not super thin. So this is my too thick. And this is my too thick consistency, and this is going to leave a mound upon a mound and go away. This is a regular consistency, but for the Dutch pour, or a pour that I'm going to be using my blow dryer, it's not going to move very well. So that's really not what I want. And then my too thin consistency is going to be, it's going to disappear or even go into integrate immediately in, and it's just going to push too much. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to take both of these. These are too thick, these are too thin. I'm going to do the too thick, but I'm not going to do it everywhere just because I'm going to scrape it off and then immediately do too thin. So I don't want to waste a lot of paint here, but I'm going to show you some of the things that you can see in paint that's too thick and paint that's too thin, so you can compare this to your pours and hopefully change what you need to get a better acrylic pour with a blow dryer. So again, first we're going to do paints that are too thick, and I'm just going to pour a bunch of this white here in the middle. Save some to put on the sides here. But I'm just going to use my hair dryer. I like this Joyum, super cheap on Amazon. I'll link that in the description below. But I like this one because it has a diffuser that is the same length everywhere. It doesn't get big in the middle, and it's small. It's not really fat, so I get a concentrated stream, and I can use the low sometimes, depending on the thickness of my paint, to get the stream that I want and get a nice thick stream here. So let's try this. And if you'll notice there, the paint, because it's so thick, it actually is mounding up rather than getting pushed. And that is something you can tell your paint is too thick. So another way to tell if your paint is too thick is you get all these ridges of paint. The paint isn't flattening on itself, which means your paint is too thick. What will happen, and what many of you guys have told me, is when the paint dries, you get this area, right, where you've blown the paint, that is higher up than everywhere else. That generally happens when your paint is too thick, although that does happen all the time with acrylic pours. It just happens, it's more pronounced when your paint is too thick. So now, another tip is you don't need a lot of paint when you're doing this. Granted, this is too thick. And I'm putting my most opaque color on the bottom, a semi-opaque on the top, and a transparent way on the top. I'm going to do a little more than normal of this transparent. And then I'm doing a traditional Dutch pour, so I'm going to put a little extra stuff on either side. Now you can blow this over your color and then blow it through. You will lose some of your color. It mutes the color. So if you want very mute, delicate colors, do that. If you want bold colors, you're just going to pop your paint over. Again, this is very thick. So watch what happens when I'm doing this. See how I get the big mounds of paint right here? And I don't get that nice delicate coloring. It's pretty defined on the edges. This again is what happens when your paint is too thick. Another thing, I can do a little bit of torching to see if I can get some cells coming up. And with too thick of paint, generally you're only going to get the tiny cells. You're not going to get the nicer cells and lacing that you want. So paint, too thick. You're going to see lots of texture in the paint as you blow. It's going to create big mounds, and then those mounds are going to splatter some that you saw here. And you're not going to get a delicate color. It's going to be a darker set of colors. So now I've scraped my canvas, and now we're going to use the very thin paint. And again, with this Joyum, I'm using the low setting. I'm not even going to high. Now with my thin paint, I got lots of bubbles. Just because it's so thin, that air is just getting up underneath and staying. But you notice the texture that we saw with the thick paint is all going away. It's starting to flatten out. It's self-leveling because the paint is thinner. So let's add our color. And again, I prefer, especially with like a Dutch pour, I prefer very delicate colors rather than the colors being everywhere. It just depends on your preference there. If you're doing something like Molly's waves, you might want a ton of extra color. But with something like this, we're just going to put that on. Add a little extra white on both sides. And then, and I can already tell my paints are thin because look how they're mixing on the outside here with my pearl on top. So again, look how much less of the dark, deep colors I got and more the feathery colors, the lighter colors, because this was really thin. And then I want to show you what happens when you use a torch. Thin isn't necessarily bad, but if I used a ton of color here, you saw how little I used, this would have been overwhelmed. I would have had no white space, and I almost don't have any white space way out here, even though I used a tiny bit of color. It just moves so much more when it's thin. Again, it's not bad, but you may not like this color and you want to know why it happened, probably because your colors are a little bit too thin. All right, so the next important part to know when you're using a blow dryer is you want to make sure you are not drying sideways. You're not pushing it sideways like this. The problem is it will shoot way more that way, and it will move the paint too quickly. So if you want the paint really to make that nice flowy look, you want to start way too high. I mean, right now I'm 10 inches off the ground with my hand here. Way too high, come down to where you want to go. We're going to tilt very slightly, and I'll show you here. So this is straight up and down. I'm going to tilt very slightly, maybe 15 degrees of a tilt. And then I'm going to hit my paint and slowly move off. I'm not going to go deeper as I go, because if you go deeper, it's going to push that paint farther. If I want a nice even look, I'll get my 15 degrees, I'll get where I want it to start moving the paint, and then I'll go horizontally across. What I see a lot of people do is they go down and up, and that creates that divot and the lack of color here, and more color on the outside and more color on the line of color and less here in the middle, because you're pushing the color too hard when you go down. You're pushing all of the color out. So that might be something you want, but it's something you want to keep track of. So start up too high, come down. If your power is too low, in my case, I always use low for this particular one, but if on yours, low isn't enough, you can turn it up to high, but same thing, start out way high, then come down, come down, slant slightly, and then move horizontally. I just want to show you the thickness. It's leaving a mound and immediately disappearing. No mound upon a mound. It's leaving a tiny mound and then disappearing. That's what we want to see here. You can have a little bit thinner where it almost doesn't leave a mound, it just immediately integrates, and your paints will spread out a little more. Anywhere in that range is what we want. And I didn't like the color combinations of the other ones, so I added a tiny bit of metallic red, crimson red to this, just to make it a little bit of a pink instead of a dark color. So we're going to pour our base paint here and blow it out. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to practice on my base paint. It's the perfect time. You're not going to hurt anything, but I can practice coming straight down, doing my 15 degrees and moving horizontally, not going down, not coming up, etc. All right, so depending on how much paint you put on here is going to show how much paint is going to get blown. So the more I put, the more it's going to blow everywhere. I personally prefer less paint. So I'm going to put a teeny tiny line of each one of these paints and then not a huge amount of extras on the side so it doesn't blow too far. So I get my white negative space on the outside. So we're going to start with the blue. Again, I'm going to start off the canvas so I don't leave a big dip right here. I'm just going to go so I'm using student level acrylic. So I did about it's Canella's recipe where it's 2 parts floetrol, 1 part paint, a little bit less than a part of water. But you can do just paint and water and get the right consistency like Rinska Dauna does. You can Molly does it that way also, but it just depends on what you want to do here. And I do want this to be very subtle, so I am going to blow my color up over and then blow it out from there. One other thing with this is when I started, I used to start at one side and blow, and I never got a very good composition. So one thing you can do is start just off center, do your blow, do your blow, do your blow, do your blow. Then you have an even composition on both sides and you can fix it with a straw or with mouth blowing or whatever you need to. And you can see how this is completely flattened out even after I blew, because the paint is the right consistency and it's self-leveling. It's not too heavy, not too thick. I don't like this white area here. I wonder if I can... I think I'm going to leave it at that. So now we'll go in and look at some of these finer details. I had some white areas, which I used my popsicle to make some little additional interest pieces to kind of break them up, especially right there. I had put that right through the middle here. But overall, I'm pretty pleased with this. Composition looks good. That one center piece I probably will notice, but other people probably would not. We'll see how it dries. So I love how beautiful this came out, and I think with a nice resin coat on top, it will really make these metallics jump out and really cause those cells that you can see down here just to really pop. And if you want to learn how to create cells in your acrylic pour, I have a great video here that you can watch to learn my tips and tricks.